Hi, I'm Daniel Fisher here at Sweetwater Sound, and today I'm really excited to have Marcus Ryle of Oberheim. And Marcus and I go back with several projects, but I actually know his handiwork long before that. And so I'm really excited to talk about the origins and what he was thinking about when he made it and what happened when each of those things came out. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And how do you like Sweetwater?
It's the best. Always good to come here.
It's a fun place to work in and a fun place to be in, and really a fun place to see these kind of things. So we're talking about Oberheim, and so tell me about like your first start with them.
Well, I'd say my start was like a lot of people. It was a brand, an aspirational brand that I could only dream of maybe someday owning. I mean, I got into synthesizers when I was a young kid, and I remember when I saw my first 2-voice and then the 4-voice. At West LA Music, I believe, in Los Angeles. This would be, I think that came out around 1975. And I was 14 years old, and synthesizers were already my dream, right? I had no idea that just 5 years later, I'd end up meeting Tom Oberheim, and he'd offer me a job. So, Oberheim first really just lit up the music scene with the original SEM and 4-voice and 8-voice and on so many iconic records. I mean, it really was the king of polyphonic synthesizers back before polyphonic synthesizers even was a thing. And then Dave Smith, of course, came out with the Prophet 5, and that really changed the game. And that was in 1978. And at that time, that really lit a fire for Tom. And he, because now having a microprocessor controlled analog synth provided so much more capability. So he and Jim Cooper quickly whipped together the OBX, which was introduced in 1979, which was based on that original SEM, the old 4-voice. The voice was almost identical to the original cream-colored big Oberheim 4-voice and 8-voice. But the OBX became a huge success, and again, was a synthesizer I totally dreamt of. And through circumstances that, it's kind of a long story we won't have to tell here, but I happened to meet Tom Oberheim, and he offered me a job. And I think I said something like, any chance I'd be able to get my hands on an OBX if I take the job? And he said, sure, and that kind of inked the deal.
Wow.
For 19-year-old me.
Yeah.
So that was 1980, and that started kind of this next era at Oberheim. Now we had microprocessors. First things I got to work on were the DSX and DMX, actually the OBXA first, and then these others. We created the Oberheim system. So it's kind of, Oberheim was pioneering the whole notion of having drums and sequencers synchronized together, because this is the era before MIDI. And the OB series, the OBX, OBXA, and OB8 became really hugely successful, and again, on lots of records. And then Tom really was gave the engineers a lot of free rein, and we expanded, so to speak, beyond that, and really wanted to design the synthesizer of our dreams, and designed the Xpander and Matrix 12 in 84 and 85, and it was a great time. It was really an opportunity to just explore a sonic canvas that just hadn't been explored before, and we really enjoyed it. It was a really special time.
I got to say a couple things about the Xpander before you move on.
Okay.
So I had owned synthesizers. I bought my first Prophet 1, the Pro 1, back when I had got my first Army check, and that was the first synth. And I had studied at Northern Illinois University on a Moog System 55. I had a VCS3. I had the Electrocomp modules and 2 tape decks. And so I had lots to play with, but the Pro 1 was my first synth. And there was a lot to learn on that synth, and just the way the routing on the left side, and I just learned a lot from that. And then I eventually went polyphonic about the Korg Poly 6, which I loved to death. But again, sort of a simple synth, basically. And then the DX7, which was a different world, and I learned that inside out. But then when I got out of the Army, I went to Berklee. And I said, I've been playing with synthesizers. I'm going to just I'm going to do music production engineering. I've already got that stuff. But every day I'd walk past the synth lab, right? And right on the top of the rack was the Oberheim Matrix Xpander, you know? And I'd see that thing, you know, and there were also other amazing things. You know, you had the Kurzweil K250, you had the Juno 106, the Yamaha DX72 FD. And that was a station. And so I finally said, I double majored just to get into that room. And when I got my hands on that Xpander, there were so many options for things that it had never occurred to me that there'd be an option. So, you know, an LFO, yeah, okay, my other synths, you could choose between triangle and square. Maybe if you're lucky, sawtooth, you know. But it was, where in the phase would you like to start your LFO? And like, I didn't even think of that, you know? It's like, wow, that means I could, and do you want your LFO to start with a key start, or do you want to be free running? There were, and just in every page, there was something, you know, the tracking, like, oh my God, I could bend anything into something else. And then it just looked cool, the green lighting and the separate readouts for each knob group. And I fell in love with that synth. So I had to throw that in.
I appreciate that. The Xpander, and so the Xpander came out first, and the Matrix 12 was really just two Expanders and a keyboard. But it was really inspired by modular synths. I mean, the thing at that point, modular synths, you could do anything you want, but it's monophonic. Polyphonic synths, now under microprocessor control, fantastic having polyphony, but by definition, you were much more limited in terms of just because of the user interface and the circuitry of what it could do. And with the Xpander, if you remember, you know, the original, the Synthy, the pin matrix, that's really where the matrix name comes from. This notion that you could connect any modulation source to any modulation destination. And we really set out to figure out how could we do that in a polyphonic synth. And went further, actually multi-timbral synth, right? Each voice separately programmable. You could have
separate outputs.
Right? Separate outputs for each voice. And like you said, that meant you could just, almost anything you could dream up. You know, there were 5 LFOs per voice. You could have each one modulating the next if you wanted.
And a vibrato LFO,
you
too.
Could, right, you could, exactly. So, you could, if you wanted to modulate each time constant of an envelope, it was as deep as we could imagine. We tried to build into that and try to make the user interface still accessible with the displays. Displays were a new and expensive thing to put in a synthesizer. So that was an exciting time.
None of that matters if it didn't sound good. It sounded
that was kind of important too.
Good. And I go back in time with synths that I loved. I'm an old man and I've been playing with synths since the mid '70s. But you sometimes go back and you try a synth, you're like, that wasn't as amazing as I remembered it. And I haven't had a chance to go back to one of those. So I've never really gone back and it's like, is it as wonderfully delicious and buttery as I remembered? I suspect it probably is.
Come on out to California. You can try mine. Yeah, it still sounds awesome.
That's my dream synth. I would love to have that, in a shrine.
Really, really proud of that synth. And part of the sound credit, Doug Curtis was really a brilliant engineer and synthesist who left us far too early, sadly. But the Curtis chips are legendary. And we worked with Doug closely because we actually needed to do what we wanted to do. We needed some new chips for the Xpander. So he was really an integral part of the team, even though he didn't work for Oberheim per se. So that was a very special machine.
Yeah. So then we go on to the next era.
Yeah, well, the next era, it's like any good play, right? You got to have some conflict and suspense. And sadly, Oberheim had kind of hit its peak. It was amazing the amount of business we were doing, but like a lot of entrepreneurial companies, there isn't always someone involved who really has business experience. And sadly, the company was undercapitalized and had to file for bankruptcy in '85. So Tom actually lost the right to use his name and that logo in 1985. It was owned by a small company for a few years, and then Gibson owned it for a while and did some partnerships with some products that were called Oberheim but didn't involve Tom. And then it kind of languished for a while in the wilderness. And Gibson still owned the Oberheim brand but wasn't using it. And when they, Gibson subsequently ended up filing for bankruptcy. When the new owners came in, we spoke with them and said, how about letting Tom have his name back? And they were very gracious to do that.
I remember
and
that.
that really set things off to say, well, is there a chance to bring Oberheim back? Tom is 83 years old, but he still just loves synthesizers and he's loved tinkering. And he'd brought a reissue of the SEM back. I think it was around 2009. I might have the year wrong, but so he was still involved with synthesizers. And then he did the wonderful collaboration with Dave Smith on the OB6, which the one behind you can see now actually says Oberheim on it. But back when it came out, it couldn't say Oberheim. It just had Tom's signature.
I didn't realize it was right around that one.
Because that was before Tom had his name back. So it was wonderful to see how the relationship between Dave and Tom developed. I mean, clearly we were competitors in the 80s. I mean, good friends too, but competitors are now working together. And now the opportunity to be able to work with Dave Smith and the sequential team to really bring back the iconic Oberheim sound in the right way with the OBX8, much like the sequential team was able to do with the Prophet 5. That just sounded like too good a dream to pass up. And for me to be able to come back home, essentially, because I had retired from Yamaha on Line 6, and to be able to now, dust off all those old notes and original software, which I still had, and original cassettes, and all the original synths and schematics, and say, let's just dig in and make the very best synthesizer we can again. And that's been very gratifying. And, thrilled to have had a chance to work with Dave so closely. We'd known each other so long. This was really the first synth we got to collaborate on, and it's, of course, bittersweet since it was one of the last synths that he got to work on. But, really feel so lucky that this has Dave's fingerprints on it as well as Tom's.
I got to mention, you mentioned cassettes.
Yeah.
And for the younger people, presets used to be stored on cassette tape. You'd take your tape deck, you'd take a cord out of that, plug it in the back, and it would go. And eventually...
Pretty good impression, yeah. That's about
eventually, you'd have your patches, hopefully.
Hopefully.
And but if something went wrong, it didn't ruin the rest of the patches.
That's right.
Unlike a digital file. Yeah. But man, I remember backing up those tapes and worrying about the tapes and things like that. And then on this one, in Fort Wayne, we have once a year we do a thing where we take local bands and force them to play a different band on stage at the embassy. And so I'm in a Pink Floyd tribute, and they said, you're going to do Styx. And I used only that keyboard.
Nail it, right?
Oh, it was so good. It was nothing else at the time would have done it. Yeah. And Chuck had his, and it was signed by Dave, and it was signed by Oberheim, and so Chuck loaned it to me, and I took it on the stage, and just nothing sounded as perfectly designed for that job as that synth. I love the OB6.
You know what? I don't know if you may know this story, but many people may not. Sweetwater played a really critical role in this OB6 because there was a Gear Fest. Might have been around 2015. I'm not sure exactly when. We could go back and look because I know there's videos of it where Chuck invited Tom and Dave and Roger Lynn
at the table.
all
I saw
come
that.
out and do a talk. And I was there as well, and I was talking with the guys, and Tom was making his SEMs, and he was talking to me and talking with Dave, and he's like, I'd really like to do a polyphonic synth again. And, and on the plane back, he and Dave started scheming about how maybe sequential could help make that a reality. So probably had it not been for that Sweetwater event, none of this may have even happened. So
and it was brilliant using the shell, and of the other one to do this one.
Right, leverage. Basically, it's like the basic form is like, well, let's take a Prophet 6, but we're gonna it's Oberheim now. Let's change the UI. It needed different controls. Needed the SEM style, state variable filter, and And then you go and then you go, wow, it's got a totally different character, and it's like it's another flavor that you got to have in the toolbox.
And it was sweet getting the effects and the phase shifter. And I really appreciated the phase shifter going back to the Prophet 6. That was nice.
Yeah, you know, the Tom Oberheim, I think really should deserve credit as really the inventor of the phase shifter, because the way I understand the story, he was setting out to try to simulate a Leslie speaker, and he was tinkering with electronics, and he thought, you know, if an all-pass filter is technically what's involved, he thought that might kind of have a bit of a Doppler effect, and he built this phase shifter, and of course it didn't really sound like a Leslie speaker, but it sounded pretty cool. Yeah, it did. And then he ended up building that for Maestro, and Maestro phase shifter with the 3 colored buttons. I still have one of those classics too.
I think they're releasing them again with those colors too.
They may, actually, yeah, it's possible. But that was really the first phase shifter, and that inspired all the phase shifters afterwards.
And then just listening to music of the 70s, like phase shifter was such a new, fresh, exciting thing. Yeah. I remember I used to go see these silly movies about chariots of the gods and UFOs and stuff, and it always had a string synthesizer with phase shift, and it sounded so magical and new. And you know, I try to tell people, go back and listen to those sounds, like the tri-chorus on the ensembles of string machines. I keep saying, get that right, get that exactly right, because that exact sound effect it gives me chills, you know.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
And just the same with the phase shifter, you know, and just such a glorious sound. So then we're going into the new era.
So here we are in the new era, being able to take, you know, and this is it's 100% analog signal path. Basically, be able to take everything that's in an OBX, OBXA, OB8, and now have it in a modern synth where, you know, we have modern production techniques where it can be really reliable. You know, as nostalgic as people get about the old vintage stuff, they forget that it was a bunch of people in a room, you know, hand picking a resistor out of a bin and sticking it in and soldering it, and you hope they pick the right one, and you hope that it's not a cold solder joint, but you know, hand crimping cables, exactly. You know, I mean, one of the reasons that it can be challenging sometimes to keep those synths working is because there's human error. And now to be able to take still the same circuitry, but now use surface mount parts, you know, automated assembly, great test procedures and so on, making a really stable and reliable synth that still sounds exactly like those classics and can even play those old cassette tapes right into it. So if you got your old, and it's amazing that those hold up. I still had all my original, I had the original cassette from my OB8s from when I was gigging, and loaded them in, and it works.
Yeah, they're pretty robust. I used to worry about them, and I loaded a Poly 800 and it worked. I was really surprised about that. Yeah. And another thing I try to tell younger people, like, oh, I found this old, you know, CS8 or this or that, you know, and I always say the same thing, like, are you prepared to pay to replace all the capacitors? You know, capacitors dry out, and man, you can argue, oh, well, the old one is this slight tiny. It's like, you know, the thing I always explain to people is, you'd be amazed what a really good EQ can do to make any of the qualities you love about an old synth in a new synth.
You know, I really don't recommend someone buy vintage just for the sound. I think it's important to know that it has other value too. I have a huge vintage collection. It does more for me than sound. It has emotional value for me. I also have my dad's original Triumph Bonneville 650 from 1968. And I can't keep that motorcycle running. I'm just not good enough mechanically. But it has emotional value, right? So if anyone wants vintage gear because it means something to them, I never discourage it. If you want vintage gear because you just want to make music, I do typically caution people, because working on this, I probably spent half of my time repairing and recalibrating my old synths in order to ensure that we had the new one right, because I was needing to use them now regularly all the time, and there's always something else that's going to go wrong with it, you know? And I'm not in no way bashing vintage synths. Like I said, I have tons of it, and it for me gives me a lot of value beyond just what it sounds like. If if I was just gigging today and I wanted an Oberheim sound, I know I've been inside. I know this does it completely. It's not a simulation. It's the same circuitry. This will sound every bit as good and do every sound I could do on those originals, but it's not going to break.
And you can store your lunch and sneakers in.
And let's not forget, it's things we take for granted now, like, okay, I've got velocity sensitivity and aftertouch. Of course, you expect that today. We wish we could have had that on an OB8. We couldn't back then, right? So why not have, you can turn it off if you want to be authentic, right? You could play it with, if you're going to play jump, you got to turn the velocity off. It won't sound right otherwise. But having, some extra things like that, some modern conveniences, MIDI built in, that's kind of nice, USB.
Another thing I tell people that they say, well, how come this modern one, it doesn't sound like this album that used that? And it's like, do you realize how much engineering and processing went into those synths? None of those synths were played raw onto your album. There was compression and EQ and effects and just hours and hours and hours just to get that string sound right, just to get that lead right.
That's right. Yeah, you have to be aware of the whole signal path. You want to start with the right source material, right? So you're able to start here, and it's the right material. But yeah, if it's drenched with effects and EQ, you gotta do that too.
And so now the future.
The future. Well, it's an exciting time.
You know which one I'd ask for.
Let me guess. We get asked for that a lot.
Yeah.
I'll never say never, but I'd say in general, what we're looking at now is first of all, just realizing that, Oberheim now, the fact that there was this opportunity for it to be reborn, the fact that, we've got a great team of people working on it, that we're able to team with the sequential team that's now also part of the Focusrite group, that to have the resources that means that Oberheim won't be going out of business again, like those old days. And to basically say, well, with this rebirth, let's start imagining where would Oberheim have gone if Oberheim had not gone out of business. We were leading the world in where analog synthesis, digitally controlled analog synthesis could go, like with the Xpander and others. There's an opportunity to see where that could go, and an opportunity, as we were doing back then too, of being able to say there's aspects of the Oberheim sound that are so desirable. Not everyone can afford a synth of this price. Seeing how we can also have some products that could be more affordable, that may not do everything this does, but can do different things and so on, just like how Oberheim was able to do before. So there'll be a mix of properly, paying our respects and homage to the classic days of Oberheim, but also looking at how far can Oberheim take it into the future.
And, as far as the sound goes, a lot of people, what they really want, when we throw all these features, but a lot of people, they want to turn up two sawtooths slightly detuned with the filter wide open and hit a big chord and just go, that.
It just does it. See, I'm getting the goosebumps just saying it, because that's what this does. That's when I knew we were there. It just does that. It immediately says Oberheim. The musicality is just inherent in it, and the whole history of all the great music that was made with these sounds just comes through. And that's why doing analog signal path is so exciting, because there's an aspect of it that actually makes it easy, because this is what analog does naturally. It's always, all the oscillators are always going to be in different phase. There's going to be all this movement, all this stuff that, there's some wonderful digital synths out there, but you have to consciously design in all of the oddities of analog if you want to try to do that. Otherwise, you end up with a pretty sterile sounding machine. Yep. So it does exactly what I'd hope a great instrument does, which is you just start playing it and you're instantly inspired to make more music, because it just sounds great.
And I know it's a travesty to pure analog people, but I like an analog synth into a good digital effects. And they say, why? You're ruining the analog. I'm going, wait a second. I've just created the sound that I want via analog.
Right.
Why don't I want that to go into the most full range frequency, full spectrum, full everything? For a delay, I want a delay to exactly reproduce this. It's very easy to have the frequency damp over time and have it bloom and have it do all that stuff. But I can't have an analog delay that just cuts out here and it's all gone. I need all that.
Well,
and only a digital do it.
You're making the decision based on what it sounds like. That's what it should be. It shouldn't be an ideology. I mean, I'm someone who's been very comfortable in my career living entirely in the digital domain and the analog domain. I'm agnostic. What I'm fixated on is things should sound amazing.
Yeah.
And I think some of the most amazing things you can do are combinations of analog and digital. And frankly, there's virtually not a piece of recorded music any of us hear that hasn't at some point been digitized, right? Unless you're going back to something that was an analog pressing and on your turntable or on tape that stayed that way the whole way, which very few people do. But for me, it doesn't make sense to just convince yourself it's going to be better because it's analog. It should be better because it's better. This is better because what analog is doing in the synthesizer is sonic magic and a fantastic digital reverb, digital effects. I still have a classic Fender Rhodes, and I run it through my HX Stomp, and I can put the tri-stereo chorus on it, and I can put a plate reverb on it, and it sounds fabulous. And it's still, but the origin of the sound is still plays like this Rhodes, because that's what I like to play. So.
And do you have your hand in anything non-synth still?
Non-synths, yeah. This has been a really fun chapter for me because it allows me to provide advisement to a handful of different companies about a handful of different things, some of which I can talk about, some of which I can't. But probably one of the ones that's coming out very soon that's been very exciting to work on is new digital drum kit from DW, DWE kit, which is it's quite groundbreaking as well, and been a lot of fun to work on with a really talented team. So that's something synth related that I'm
very
I'm
important
with.
though.
Yeah.
As a live musician, I'm in bands that use live drums, but I've also been in bands that use just straight digital drums. And in those bands, we're entirely in-ear. There are no monitors on stage, and all the problems that have to do with playing live go away when there are no stage monitors, when none of the mics are picking up anything, and it comes down to, can you make the drums good enough? What I always find is that everyone's hitting 127. And if you just send 127, unless you're building randomizers into all the drum parts, they're gonna be machine gun.
Yes.
And so it's like we gotta somehow move this whole range of everybody living here. How can we get them to live in here?
Well, another way of looking at it is, I think electronic drums have done a wonderful job of solving the problems for everyone but the drummer. Because it's true, if your problem is your next door neighbor plays drums, you're sure glad that they've got an electronic kit. If you're playing with in-ears and you want to be able to have a good mix, it's fabulous. I think having DW, having the world's best drum company, dedicate over 5 years into research, into how to truly make a kit for drummers. It is, in fact, a real DW acoustic drum kit. It can be converted by changing the heads into a true, you could gig with it as an acoustic DW
And
made
it
in
kills
Oxnard.
a lot of the sound?
Well, I'm saying it's convertible. You have
like
two
when you convert
versions.
it.
If you convert it to electronic, it is mesh heads that are dampened. But on top of that, we solved the problem for the drummers that there's virtually no technology to set up. It's completely wireless. You set up your drum kit.
Wow.
You
Because that can be a lot of wires. Well, I've done that every drum.
and it just works. So that's why it's fun. It's solving problems. I mean, that's the common thread, I guess, with the stuff I love to be involved in, is things that really solve problems for musicians and can inspire them to make more music. That's what's exciting.
And
I just
goosebumps.
happen to, and goosebumps are a good thing too. I suck as a drummer, so keyboards are my first love, and that's why I really love working on this stuff. And quite fortunately, there's plenty of world-class drummers at DW to make sure the the drum side is working right there.
That's really exciting. And so I just want to take this opportunity to say thank you from all of us at Sweetwater, from all your customers, and from me, you know, from at least the 80s. Your products have had a major part in my life, and working on the projects with you on certain things has been really fun and educational. Looking very much forward to the new stuff. And yeah, I get it. I'm always asking, give me like the exact copy of the Matrix. But once you say you're going to give me something that does all that and more, I was like, oh, okay. Maybe I'll take that instead. So I really appreciate that.
Really appreciate it. Thanks.
I'm Daniel Fisher here at Sweetwater. This is Marcus Ryle from Oberheim. Thank you very much for watching.